It was late afternoon at the Lakeside Community Arts Center, the time of day when the sun pressed through the tall windows and left warm streaks of orange on the wooden floors. The main music room felt bigger than usual, almost too quiet. Except for the soft squeaks of a mop moving back and forth across the glossy surface dot, the person pushing the mop was a woman in her 40s, dressed in a simple uniform and worn-out sneakers. She moved slowly and carefully, like someone who understood how to treat a room with respect. Her name was Elena, though hardly anyone ever used it. Most people simply called her the Janitor, if they spoke to her at all. She didn't complain. She did her tasks, kept the spaces clean, and stayed out of the way. But today, she found herself working in the very room where the advanced piano class was about to practice. She knew she should have come earlier, but another spill in the hallway had delayed her. And now she was quietly trying to finish before anyone showed up. As she pushed the mop toward the grand piano. She paused for a moment, letting her eyes linger on the gleaming instrument. Even without touching it, she could feel the pull, the kind of pull that comes only when something once mattered deeply to you. She quickly looked away and kept mopping. Just then, the door opened with a sharp sound, and in walked the piano teacher, a woman in her late 50s. She carried herself stiffly, like someone who believed every moment was important. Her short gray hair framed her narrow face, and she wore a long dark skirt that swayed with each step. She held a clipboard tight against her chest. She stopped the moment she saw Elena. Her eyebrows lifted with a mixture of surprise and irritation. "Oh," she said, letting the words stretch in the air. "You're still here?" Elena straightened. "Yes, I'm almost finished. I just need a few more minutes." The teacher let out a huff, as if the very idea bothered her. "Well, please finish quickly. My students will be arriving any moment now. This room must be quiet. And clean." Elena nodded silently. She had heard this tone before, not only from this teacher, but from others like her. People who walked into the room expecting everything to already be perfect. She didn't take it personally, or at least she tried not to. She dipped the mop back into the bucket and wrung it out. As she resumed cleaning, the teacher paced around the room, checking the seating arrangement, adjusting music stands, and hitting a few keys on the piano to test the sound. The notes rang loud, echoing across the room. "Please don't touch the piano while I'm working in here," the teacher said sharply, as if Elena had been the one playing. "Moisture and instruments do not mix." "I understand," Elena replied softly. She kept her eyes on the floor, but inside something small twisted. Not anger, not quite. More like a sting of being underestimated. Again, the teacher continued fussing over the room, muttering about the schedule, the recital, the pressure, the mistakes her students had been making, and how everything needed to be perfect today. Minutes later, the first student arrived, a tall teenage boy carrying sheet music. He nodded politely at the teacher, but barely looked at Elena. He stepped around her, bucket and headed for the piano. More students followed. A girl with a braided ponytail, a boy with thick glasses, a quiet student who held his music folder like it was fragile. A few parents peeked in, whispering encouragement before slipping back out. The room began to fill with soft chatter and the sound of pages flipping. But under all that, Elena could still feel the tension coming from the teacher, who kept glancing over at her as if every second she remained was disrupting some perfect plan. "Are you almost done?" The teacher asked again, tighter this time. "Yes," Elena said. "I'm finishing the last section now." She swiped the mop across the final patch of floor and moved to put everything away. But before she could wheel her bucket out of the room, the teacher called out, "Just leave it by the door. Don't block the pathway. And make sure none of the water drips onto the floor the students will be using." "I will," Elena assured her, The teacher turned back to her class. Everyone, today is very important. Your recital is only a few days away, and most of you still have issues with timing. I want no distractions. No excuses. Let's begin with warm-ups. Elena remained by the doorway for a moment, pressing the mop into the bucket and preparing to leave. But she could feel the teacher's eyes on her again. Could you hurry, please? The teacher said, "This is not the best time to be lingering." I'm not lingering, Elena said quietly. I'm just making sure I don't spill any water as I move the bucket. Yes, well, just be careful. Though her voice wasn't loud, it carried a kind of coldness that made Elena shrink a little. She pushed the bucket carefully, trying not to make a sound, but the wheels squeaked anyway. A few students glanced in her direction. One of them exchanged a look with another student, not unkind, but curious, like they were wondering why she seemed nervous. Finally, Elena reached the hallway and set the bucket aside. She leaned against the wall for a second, letting out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. It was always like this, being seen, but not seen. Present, yet invisible. She heard the teacher begin the warm-up drills, counting beats in a firm tone. The students played simple scales, the notes floating through the open doorway. Elena listened. She couldn't help it. Music had a way of reaching her no matter how hard she tried to stay detached. As she stood there, the memories came back years ago, when she used to sit at a piano just like the one in the classroom. How she used to practice until her fingers felt tired but satisfied. How she used to believe she could become someone in the music world, but life had a way of interrupting dreams. When she moved to this country, everything changed. Bills needed to be paid. Family needed support. And music, though still in her heart, had to be pushed aside. She inhaled slowly and pushed the memories away. Work was work. She needed the job, and she did it well. That was enough. She was about to leave the area entirely when she heard the teacher say, "Hold your tempo. Do not rush." Honestly, every year I have to deal with the same issues. There was a pause, followed by the soft shuffle of music sheets. The teacher sighed dramatically and said, "Let's try again. And this time, please focus." Elena peeked into the room through the cracked door. The students looked nervous, trying their best, but the pressure was heavy. The teacher's sharp voice was making them tighten up even more. The girl with the braided ponytail whispered to the boy beside her, "I always mess up when she gets like this." "It's fine," the boy whispered back. "Just don't look at her." The piano keys clashed suddenly, a mistake. Then another. The teacher rubbed her forehead and paced. "This is unacceptable. We cannot have this level of performance at the recital." Elena felt a familiar heaviness rise in her chest. Music wasn't supposed to feel like this. It was supposed to be something warm, something human, not something that made people shrink. She knew she needed to leave. She picked up her cleaning cart and turned to push it down the hallway. But just before she left completely, the teacher's voice rang out again, honestly. "This day is going to be impossible." A few seconds later, the teacher noticed the backup piano in the corner of the room. She walked to it, tapping the keys. This instrument hasn't been tested today." Elena slowed her steps, her ear catching the comment. She didn't know why she paused, but she did. "It doesn't matter," one of the students said. "We don't use that one." "We may have to," the teacher replied. "If the main piano has any issues, we will need this one ready." She tapped a few more keys, but the sound didn't tell her enough. Someone needs to test it properly. Just a few notes. The students exchanged looks, but none moved. They seemed unsure, maybe even afraid of being scolded again. The teacher turned toward the doorway and saw Elena still nearby. She said, lifting her chin slightly, "You're here. Come in and press a few keys so I can check the sound levels." Elena froze. The students stared at her, waiting. The teacher tapped her foot lightly, impatient. I don't think, Elena began, but the teacher cut her off. It's very simple. Just a few keys. Anyone can manage that. Please, let's not waste time. Elena stepped into the room slowly, feeling every pair of eyes on her. Something inside her tightened again. She wasn't afraid of the piano. She was afraid of being judged. She approached the old bench, her steps small and hesitant. She placed her hand on the edge of the piano, feeling the smooth wood. What the teacher didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Elena had touched a piano like this long before she ever held a mop. As she sat down, she exhaled quietly. And the room, for a moment, fell completely still. The room felt different now, almost charged with a quiet tension, as Elena sat at the old piano. She kept her hand still for a moment, not touching the keys, as if she needed time to gather the courage just to press a single note. The teacher waited with her arms crossed, tapping her shoes softly against the floor. The students watched in complete silence, unsure what was happening, but curious enough not to look away. Elena wasn't sure why she felt so nervous. It was only a few keys after all. She was not being asked to perform. She was not being asked to prove anything. She was just here because the teacher didn't want her students to make mistakes on the backup piano before the recital. That was all. But deep inside, Elena felt something else stirring a part of herself. She had spent years keeping quiet, like a book left closed on a shelf. It wasn't fear of the piano. It was fear of being seen. Her fingers hovered above the keys, and before she touched them, the teacher spoke again. Just press a few notes. Middle range. I only need to hear if they sound even. It won't take long. Elena nodded once. The teacher's voice wasn't rude exactly, but it carried that same sharpness she always used when she spoke to her class. A tone that said she expected total discipline and nothing less. Elena finally let one finger fall onto a key. A soft note filled the room. It was warm, gentle, and steady. The sound surprised even her. It had been so long since she played anything. But memory is a strange thing. It doesn't always fade the way people think it does. She pressed another key, and another. She tried to keep it simple, just like the teacher asked. But the more she touched the keys, the more something awakened. Inside her, a familiar comfort slipped back into her hands, a comfort she had missed deeply. The teacher nodded briskly. Good, a little louder, please. So Elena played the next note with more strength. And another. This time, the sound rang clearer. She let her fingers fall into a short pattern, almost without meaning to. It wasn't a real melody, just a tiny shape of music her hands remembered from long ago. Several students looked at each. Others surprised. She knows how to play? One whispered. Maybe she practiced a little. Another whispered back. The teacher seemed to notice too. Her eyebrows raised slightly, but she didn't say anything yet. Elena stopped herself before. She played too much. She kept her eyes down and said, Is this enough? The teacher hesitated. It's fine. I just needed to hear the tone. Thank you. Her voice softened for a moment, but only a little. Elena nodded and stood up from the bench quickly. She didn't want to stay longer than necessary. She had things to clean, places to be, and she didn't want to risk anyone asking questions. She didn't want to answer. She stepped away from the piano and started pushing her cleaning cart down the hall. But even as she walked, she felt the faint tremble in her fingers, the kind that comes when something old and familiar wakes up inside you. Behind her, the class returned to their practice. The teacher instructed them again, guiding them through scales and timing exercises. The atmosphere had shifted just a little, not completely, but noticeably. Some students were still thinking about what they had just seen back inside the classroom. The girl with the braid whispered to the boy beside her, "She played better than some of us." "Yeah," he whispered. "Way better." The teacher overheard but didn't comment. She kept her focus on the lesson. Still, something in her expression suggested she was thinking about it too. Meanwhile, Elena continued down the hallway, trying to push away the feelings rising inside her. She told herself it didn't matter. She wasn't here to play music. She was here to clean. That was her job. She was good at it. Reliable, quiet, responsible. She reached the storage area and placed her mop and bucket inside, closing the cabinet carefully. For a moment, she let her hands rest against the door. She could hear the class faintly through. The wall piano notes, uncertain and uneven, mixed with the teacher's corrections. Every note reminded her of the life she once wanted. A life filled with music, learning, performing. A dream that had slipped away, not because she wasn't good enough, but because life had other plans. She shook her head, telling herself to stop thinking about it. Dreams were for people who had time, money, and support. She had responsibilities. She had bills. She had a family counting on her. Music was a luxury she no longer had the right to focus on. But no matter how hard she tried, the sound of the piano kept echoing inside her mind. After a few minutes, she went back to her routine. She cleaned the entry doors, wiped down handrails, emptied trash bins. The simple rhythm of her tasks usually helped her stay calm. But today, her thoughts drifted constantly. She remembered her old teacher back home, a kind older man who always said music was a language anyone could speak if they listened carefully. She remembered how she practiced for hours, how she once taught younger students, how she performed in small events that made her feel like she belonged to something bigger. She remembered the day she had to give up her dream, the day she accepted that life needed her elsewhere. Time passed, and the hallways grew quieter as other classes ended. Some parents arrived early and waited outside the music room for their children. A few of them smiled politely at Elena as she passed by, but most didn't pay much attention. She didn't mind. She wasn't here to be noticed. Back inside the classroom, the teacher was reaching her limit. The students were trying, but mistakes kept happening. One student missed the same section repeatedly, and the teacher's voice grew sharper each time. No, listen to what you're doing. You're rushing again. Start from the third measure, slowly. Focus on the rhythm. The student nodded nervously and tried again, but stumbled. The teacher let out a sigh that filled the entire room. At one point, the teacher said, "This is exactly why we struggle every year. There is a lack of discipline, a lack of focus." Some students lowered their eyes. Others looked frustrated. The atmosphere felt heavy. One student quietly asked, "Can we take a short break?" "No," the teacher replied. "We do not have time for breaks today." In the hallway, Elena paused when she heard the teacher raise her voice again. Something about it bothered her deeply. Not because the teacher was wrong. She wasn't. Teaching wasn't easy. Preparing students for a recital wasn't easy. But there was something missing from her approach. Something important. Kindness. Elena believed music needed kindness to grow. Pressure alone couldn't shape it. She continued cleaning, but her mind remained on the class. She thought about the students, how nervous they looked, how hard they were trying. She thought about the teacher, how stressed she seemed, how much she cared about the recital, but didn't always show it in a gentle way. As she dusted the window ledges, she noticed a group of younger students passing by, giggling and chatting about snacks, friends, and games. She almost smiled. It reminded her of the years when everything felt simple. Life changes fast, she thought, Sometimes too fast. She finished the windows and moved toward the drinking fountain, wiping it down carefully. Her movements were slow and thoughtful today. She wasn't tired. She was simply lost in thought. What am I doing? She whispered to herself. Why is this bothering me so much? But she knew why. Even if she tried to ignore it, she knew. Because for the first time in a long time, she had touched a piano. And that small moment had opened a part of her heart she wasn't prepared to face. Meanwhile, a class inside the practice room hit another problem. One of the boys broke a string on the main piano while practicing a fast passage. The sharp twang echoed through the room. "Oh no," he whispered. The teacher closed her eyes and muttered something under her breath. "This cannot be happening today," she said. "We needed that piano. Now we'll have to rely on the backup one until this is repaired." The students looked uncertain. They all knew the backup piano was rarely used and didn't feel as comfortable. The teacher walked over to it again, tapping a few keys. "It will have to do for now. But I need someone to test it properly. We need to hear how it responds during actual play." She looked at her students expectantly, but no one volunteered. Some were scared of messing up. Others didn't want to be the first to try it. Then the teacher's gaze drifted toward the doorway toward the hallway, where Elena had just walked past again. "You," the teacher called out. "Could you come here for a moment?" Elena turned, surprised. "Me?" "Yes," the teacher said. "You're still here. Good. I need your help again. Just for a moment." Elena hesitated, unsure why she was being asked again. But the teacher insisted with a small gesture of her hand. "Come, please. We need to test the piano. It will only take a minute." Elena walked back into the room slowly. The students watched her with an even deeper curiosity this time, some whispering quietly. The teacher pointed to the bench. "Just like before, play a few notes, something simple. I need to hear how consistent the sound is." Elena felt her chest tighten. She thought the moment earlier was over. She hadn't expected to be pulled back into the room, not again. But she also knew she couldn't say no. The teacher clearly needed help. She sat at the bench once more. This time, the room felt even quieter than before. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them above the keys. She pressed one note, then another, then a third, and something inside her whispered, "Just play." Before she knew it, her fingers began moving in a small pattern, a gentle melody, soft and delicate, like a secret she had kept hidden for years. A melody Faye. The moment Alana's fingers began to move across the piano keys, something shifted in the room. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't a sudden gasp or a burst of noise. It was quieter than that, but much deeper. The sound of the notes, soft and warm, seemed to reach into every corner of the space. Even the dust floating in the afternoon light looked like it slowed down to listen. Elena didn't start with anything big. She didn't think about showing skill or proving anything. She simply let her fingers walk through a gentle melody she used to play years ago. A small tune she had kept in a hidden part of her memory. It was the kind of melody that felt like a whisper, familiar, comforting, almost fragile. At first, she wasn't even aware of the room around her. She wasn't thinking about the teacher standing behind her with crossed arms, or the students sitting with their sheet music half forgotten on their laps. She wasn't thinking about how she was supposed to be the janitor who finished her shift quietly and left the building unnoticed. All she felt was the keys under her fingertips. Cool, smooth, familiar. She didn't realize she was playing more than she should have until a sharp intake of breath came from one of the students. "That's really good," someone whispered. Another student nudged the person next to them. Eyes wide. Elena froze for a moment. Her hands stopped moving. She looked down at the keys, suddenly remembering where she was and who she was supposed to be. "Oh, sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to play that much. I just—" "But—" The teacher interrupted her. "Play it again," the teacher said. Her voice wasn't sharp this time. It wasn't scolding or impatient. It was something else, something the students weren't used to hearing from her. Hint of softness. Elena turned her head slightly. "Again?" "Yes," the teacher said. "The same part." "Play it again." Elena hesitated. She didn't want to cause trouble. She didn't want to overstep. But everyone in the room was staring at her, not with annoyance, not with judgment, but with interest, curiosity, and something like hope. She nodded slowly. Then she let her fingers fall into this melody again. This time, the room grew even quieter. Her playing had a calm strength to it, not bold, not showy, just real, honest. Each note rose and fell like it was part of a story she hadn't told anyone in a long time. When she finished, no one spoke for several seconds. Finally, one of the younger boys said, "How did you learn to do that?" Elena looked at her hands. "I used to study music when I was younger." The girl with the braid leaned forward. "You're really good." Elena smiled gently. "Thank you." The teacher cleared her throat, but instead of sounding annoyed, she sounded uncertain, like she was not sure how to feel. "That was unexpected," the teacher said. She tried to keep her voice steady, but the room could feel the shift in her tone. Elena stood up from the bench quickly. "I'm sorry if I interrupted your lesson." "I didn't mean to." "You didn't interrupt anything," the teacher said, stopping her. "In fact, could you stay for a moment?" Elena blinked. "Stay?" "Yes," the teacher replied. "I want you to try something. Play a short scale, slow, just one." Elena hesitated, unsure why this was happening, but she sat back down, gently, and played a slow, even scale, her fingers gliding smoothly from one side of the keyboard to the other. The teacher watched her hands closely, studying her technique. The students watched too. "Elena," the teacher said finally, "how long did you study music?" The janitor felt a familiar ache in her chest. "Many years. Before I came here. Before life got complicated." Some students looked at her with sympathy. Others looked with admiration. The teacher pressed her lips together, thinking deeply. "Well, your touch is very refined, very controlled. It's rare to find that in someone who no longer plays regularly." Elena didn't know what to say. She felt exposed, like a door she kept locked for years had suddenly been opened by accident. "I don't play anymore," she said quietly. "It's been a long time." "But you should," one student said without thinking. The teacher shot the student a look, and he straightened up immediately. But even the teacher didn't disagree. She walked around the piano and stood beside Elena. "You said you studied. Did you ever perform?" Elena nodded lightly. "A few times. Mostly small events. Nothing big. And you stopped?" "Why?" Elena hesitated. That answer wasn't simple. It wasn't something she could explain in a sentence. It involved years of sacrifice, moving across countries, working long hours, choosing responsibility over dreams. It involved aging parents, younger siblings, bills, struggles. So she said the simplest things she could. Life changed. She said softly. The teacher studied her for a moment, then looked away as if embarrassed for asking. "Thank you for playing," the teacher said, her voice noticeably softer than before. "We needed that." The students nodded, agreeing. Silently, Elena stood up again, this time intending to leave for real. She didn't want to get in the way any longer. But before she could reach the door, the girl with the braid called out, "Wait, could you teach us something?" Elena turned, startled. Teach you? Well, not a whole lesson, the girl said quickly. Just maybe a small trick. Something you learned when you were studying. Something we can use. Several students nodded eagerly. The teacher seemed conflicted. Her eyebrows tightened, but she didn't say no. What kind of trick? Elena asked, confused. Something that helps. With nerves, the boy with glasses said softly. Before the recital, we keep messing up when we're stressed. Elena paused. She understood that feeling well. She had lived it many times. She walked back toward the piano slowly. There is something my old teacher used to say, she began. When you're nervous, don't think about the audience. Don't think about the mistakes you might make. Don't think about the pressure. Think only about the first note. Just the first one. If the first note is calm, the rest will follow. The students listened like she was giving them something precious. The teacher's eyes widened slightly. She seemed surprised by how simple and wise the advice was. Does that really work? A student asked. Elena nodded. It does. Because fear usually gathers before the first note. Once you start, the music carries you. The room fell silent again. Not uncomfortable silence, but thoughtful silence. Can you show us? The girl with the braid asked. Show you? Yes. The girl said, play something where we can see how you start. Just the first few seconds. The teacher took a slow breath. She was torn. It was clear she didn't usually let anyone else instruct her class. But something about Elena's presence made it difficult for her to object. Finally, the teacher nodded. Go ahead. Elena sat down again. She placed her hands on her lap for a moment, breathing slowly. Then she lifted them to the piano. She pressed the first note gently. It rang out clear and soft. Then she began a simple piece, small classical tune she remembered from her early years. Nothing too complex, nothing too long. Just enough to show how she eased into the music. The students watched with wide eyes. They didn't just hear the music. They felt the calm, the control, the love behind it. When she finished, one student whispered, I want to be able to play like that. Me too, another added. Even the teacher seemed moved. She cleared her throat again, trying to regain her usual strict posture. That was helpful, she said. Thank you. Elena smiled. I'm glad. The teacher turned back to her students quickly, almost too quickly, as if she didn't want to show too much emotion. All right, everyone, let's continue with our warm-ups. And pay attention to how you begin your first notes. It matters. The students nodded, ready to try again. Elena stepped away from the piano and went back toward the door. She was almost out of the room when the teacher spoke again. Elena? She turned. The teacher's expression was different now, less guarded, more thoughtful. Thank you, the teacher said. Not stiff, not formal, just honest. Elena nodded quietly. You're welcome. She stepped into the hallway and closed the door gently behind her. As she walked away, she realized her hands no longer trembled. They felt steady, warm, alive. Something had changed not only in the classroom, but inside her. For the first time in many years, she felt like music wasn't lost to her, like it was still waiting for her to pick it up again. And she didn't know it yet, but this small moment, the moment she touched the piano again, was only the beginning of something much bigger. The rehearsal room felt quieter than usual the next afternoon, almost as if everyone who stepped inside carried a secret they didn't know how to talk about. The memory of what had happened the day before still sat fresh in many of the students' minds, even though none of them spoke about it directly. They walked in with their music bags and sheet folders, but their eyes kept drifting toward the side room, the same room where the unexpected moment had happened. The piano teacher, who had arrived earlier than everyone else, tried to act as though nothing unusual had occurred. She arranged the sheets on the stand, adjusted the bench, and tapped the side of the piano like she always did before starting. On the surface, she appeared the same, controlled, calm, a little strict, but something in her eyes gave away that she hadn't fully let go of what she had. Witness dot she kept smoothing her skirt and clearing her throat as if trying to settle a nervous feeling she wasn't used to. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't anger. It was something closer to embarrassment that she didn't want anyone to see. A few students gathered near the back of the room and whispered to one another while pretending to check their music pages. "Do you think she'll come back today?" One muttered quietly. Another shrugged, but the curiosity in their faces was obvious. Everyone was thinking the same thing, whether the quiet woman with the cleaning cart would appear again. And if she did, whether she would touch the piano once more. The door opened, and heads turned automatically, but it was just another student entering. Still, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual, as if something was missing from the room, something everyone was secretly waiting for. The teacher clapped her hands sharply to get their attention. "All right," she said, trying to keep her tone firm. "Let's stay focused. We have a recital coming up, and there is no room for distraction. We will begin with warm-up scales." The students spread out around the pianos, but even then, their movements carried the stiffness of people trying hard not to look toward the hallway. The instructor walked from one piano to another, listening carefully to each scale and giving comments as she always did. "Slower here. Watch your fingering. Don't rush that octave." But her voice didn't have the same confidence it usually carried. She kept glancing toward the door, almost involuntarily, as if expecting someone to walk past. After the warm-ups, she instructed the group to move on to their recital pieces. A few minutes into practice, one student paused and whispered to another, "I keep hearing her playing. It's still stuck in my head." The other student nodded, agreeing silently that it wasn't surprising. Anyone who had heard those notes the day before had felt something shift inside them. It wasn't just the technical skill. It was the feeling behind the music, the way the sound filled the room like a story without words, something honest and human. It had made even the teacher stop, something few people had ever seen. While the students practiced, the teacher paced slowly, arms crossed lightly. She wasn't thinking about tempo or hand positions. Her mind kept drifting to that moment, the quiet woman sitting down at the piano, almost apologetic, and then playing as though she had been born with music, already living in her hands. The teacher still heard those notes in her mind, crisp and gentle at the same time. She had taught for years, and she knew talent when she saw it. But this was something beyond talent. It was life experience poured into sound, and it bothered her that she had dismissed this woman so quickly the day before. Eventually, the door opened again, but only halfway this time, and the familiar cleaning cart rolled past. The students stole glances at one another. The teacher turned slightly, pretending she wasn't watching. Elena entered quietly, as she always did. She wore her usual comfortable clothes and her hair tied back neatly. Her eyes moved softly across the room, acknowledging everyone with a small nod, but not wanting to disturb anything. She went straight to wiping down the door frames and taking out the small trash bins near the back. But today, the students looked at her differently. Instead of ignoring her or stepping around her cart with impatience, they seemed almost fascinated. One student whispered, "There she is," under her breath, though loud enough that two others heard. The teacher felt her chest tighten a little. She wanted to maintain control over the room, to keep the lesson structured. But her thoughts were tangled. When Elena moved toward the far side of the room, the teacher spoke without thinking, "Excuse me?" Her voice was polite, noticeably different from before. Elena paused and turned. Surprised by the tone, the teacher hesitated for one brief second and said, "Thank you for helping yesterday." A few students looked up instantly, shocked that she had acknowledged it. Elena gave a small smile, humble as ever. "Of course. I didn't mean to interrupt anything." "You didn't," the teacher said quickly, a bit too quickly. "Actually, your playing was very good." Elena's smile softened. "Thank you." She didn't say more, didn't act proud or embarrassed. She simply returned to her work with the same gentle focus she had always shown. But the room felt different after that. The teacher's voice was calmer. The students stood a little straighter, almost as if trying not to appear careless around someone they now respected. Then something unexpected happened. One of the younger students, someone usually shy and quiet, approached Elena timidly when she reached the middle of the room. "Excuse me," he whispered. Do you think you could play something again later?" "Only if you want to." Elena blinked in surprise. She had not expected anyone to ask. She looked at the teacher first, almost seeking permission, even though she didn't say anything. The teacher cleared her throat softly. Her voice came out carefully measured. "If you would like to, that would be fine." The students exchanged excited looks. Even though they tried to keep their faces calm, their eyes gave everything away. Elena smiled politely, but said, "Maybe after I finish my tasks." "I don't want to interfere." The teacher nodded. "That's all right. We'll be practicing until then." As Elena continued wiping surfaces and checking supply closets, the students practiced with a burst of new energy. Their hands moved with more purpose, as though they were trying to rise to the level of the quiet woman who had impressed them so deeply. Even the teacher found herself paying more attention, not out of strictness, but out of a desire to guide them better. She listened more carefully to each note, offering advice more patiently. Something about the presence of someone who played from emotion rather than expectation reminded her why she had begun teaching in the first place. Every few minutes, someone would glance at Elena, checking whether she was close to finishing. When she finally closed the closet door and gently pushed her cart against the wall, several students straightened immediately. Elena approached the side room almost cautiously, as if she didn't want to assume she was welcome. The teacher watched quietly, but didn't stop her. In fact, she stepped aside. Elena sat at the bench, and for a moment she just looked at the keyboard, almost as if greeting an old friend. Then she placed her hand softly on the keys. The first note she played was so gentle it almost blended with the sound of the heating vent. But then the second note followed, clearer and fuller, like the opening line of a story just beginning. Students froze mid-breath. The teacher lowered her clipboard and listened. Elena played a slow, thoughtful melody. It wasn't flashy or meant to impress. It felt like a memory being shared, something warm, something quiet, something familiar. Each note carried emotion without forcing it. The students were drawn in naturally, almost unwilling to blink. The teacher found herself for the second time in 2 days, standing completely still. She noticed tiny details she had missed before. The way Elena's fingers curved perfectly, the way her shoulders relaxed, the way her breathing matched the flow of the music. But most of all, she noticed the feeling. The feeling was what made every student stop. It made the teacher forget about schedules and practice logs. It made the room feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. When Elena finished the piece with a soft final chord, the room remained silent, almost in awe. Then a few students clapped quietly, unsure if it was appropriate. Others joined in, smiling widely. Elena looked embarrassed but grateful. "Thank you," she said simply. The teacher stepped forward slowly. She didn't want to rush her words this time. "You have a gift," she said. "A real one." Elena lowered her eyes humbly. "I just love music. And it shows," the teacher replied, her voice much softer than anyone expected. Something shifted in the atmosphere. Not just respect, though. That was there, but a sense of connection. The kind that forms when people witness something genuine. Before the students returned to their seats, one of them whispered, "She plays like the music belongs to her." And in a way, everyone agreed. As Elena stood and returned to her cart, the teacher felt a strange mix of admiration and regret that she had not seen this sooner. Admiration that she now had the chance to see it at all. And even though no one said it out loud, they all knew this wasn't the last time Elena would touch the piano. The next morning arrived with a quiet warmth, the kind that made the sunlight soften through the windows of the community arts center. People moved through the hallways with their usual routines, but anyone who had been inside the rehearsal room the day before carried a new kind of awareness with them. It was subtle, an extra glance toward the piano rooms, a small smile when passing the cleaning cart, a shift in the energy around the building. Word had not spread widely, but everyone who had been there felt something had changed. The teacher arrived earlier than usual, long before her students were scheduled to appear. She claimed she needed more time to prepare for the recital, but the truth was simpler. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about the quiet woman who had played with such calm brilliance. She walked into the rehearsal room and stood silently for a moment, staring at the grand piano as though it held an unanswered question. She approached the bench and gently pressed a few keys. The sound echoed softly in the empty room. It was beautiful, but it lacked the feeling she had heard the day before. She sat down, hesitated, then played a short passage from one of the student pieces. It came out smooth and clean, but she stopped halfway through, unsatisfied. She wasn't comparing herself to Elena. It wasn't about skill. It was about something else, the invisible emotion that lived inside the music when Elena touched the keys. The teacher rested her hands on her lap and took a slow breath. It had been years since she had thought deeply about why she started teaching. Somewhere along the way, she had focused so much on discipline, technique, and perfection that she had forgotten how much heart music could carry. Hearing someone play with pure honesty had pulled something awake in her that she hadn't realized had gone quiet. The door opened softly, and the teacher turned. It was one of her earliest arriving students, a polite and diligent girl who always came a little before time to get in extra practice. She paused, surprised to see her teacher sitting alone at the piano. "Oh, good morning," the student said gently. The teacher straightened. "Good morning. You're early. I wanted to practice my left hand part again," the student explained, lifting her sheet music folder. But her eyes flicked toward the side room, where Elena had played the day before. She hesitated. "Do you think she'd be here today?" The teacher understood exactly who she meant. "She works most afternoons, so probably." The student nodded, almost relieved. "I hope she plays again. It made me practice more last night. I wanted to get better too." The teacher studied her student for a moment. The genuine motivation coming from such a young person made something warm press against her chest. She smiled faintly. "That's good. That's very good." As more students began arriving, the room filled with its usual mixture of noise, piano benches sliding, pages turning, fingers warming upon keys. But there was something extra in the air today. The students were more focused, more eager, and every now and then they exchanged small glances toward the hallway. Not a single one of them mentioned Elena directly, but their anticipation was clear. The teacher observed all of this quietly. Every time the door creaked or wheels rolled in the hallway, several students would lift their heads. Finally, near midday, the sound they were all waiting for drifted into earshot. The soft squeak of the cleaning cart. Elena appeared in the doorway, just as she always did, with her gentle posture and calm steps. She was ready to work, not expecting anything unusual. She smiled politely to the group and moved toward the corner with her supplies dot, but the students watched her as if music were walking into the room. One of them whispered, "She's here," and the energy shifted instantly. The teacher stepped forward before anyone else had a chance to ask. Her voice was steady, respectful. "Good afternoon. If you have a moment later, we would love to hear you play again, only if you want to, of course." Elena paused in surprise. Her eyes moved from the teacher to the students, who were all suddenly pretending to be very focused on their sheet music. She smiled softly. "If it doesn't get in the way of your lesson, I'd be happy to play something when I'm finished." The teacher nodded. "That would be fine. No rush." The students tried their best to return to their practice, but their excitement simmered just beneath the surface. Their notes grew more energetic, their fingers more determined, as if preparing themselves to hear something extraordinary again. Elena took her time with her tasks, never rushing. She dusted corners, emptied bins, wiped down chairs. She moved around the room in her quiet, unobtrusive way, always careful not to disturb anyone. But today, people were aware of her presence more than ever. The teacher watched her in small glances. She couldn't shake the feeling of guilt she still carried, the memory of how dismissively she had spoken before truly seeing who Elena was. The realization settled heavier in her chest each time she replayed the moment. Finally, Elena returned her cleaning supplies to the cart, and the room seemed to pause. The teacher stepped slightly to the side, giving her space without saying the words out loud. Elena approached the piano. This time, the students didn't pretend not to watch. They leaned forward a little, waiting. Elena sat on the bench and adjusted her posture. Then she placed her hands gently on the keys, letting a few seconds pass before beginning. The pause felt intentional, like a breath before telling a story. She began playing a piece that wasn't dramatic or loud. Instead, it was full of warmth, like a memory being shared. The sound felt soft and deep, each note holding a kind of tenderness. Some students closed their eyes. Others stared at her hands, watching how effortlessly they moved. The teacher didn't move at all. Her mind wasn't thinking about technique, or mistakes, or adjustments. She was simply listening, and as she listened, she finally understood what it was that had unsettled her so much. Elena wasn't just skilled. She wasn't just gifted. She played with her whole heart, and that kind of honesty in music wasn't something the teacher had heard in a long time, not from students, not from colleagues, not even from herself. The realization hit her deeper than she expected. The students felt it too. There was something in the room that connected them all in one shared moment, something human, simple and strong. When Elena reached the final note, letting it linger gently before lifting her fingers, the room was completely still. No one even shifted in their seat. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one of the students, someone who rarely talked at all, said quietly, "It feels like your music tells a story." Elena turned to him with a soft smile. "Maybe it does. Everyone carries stories inside them. Sometimes the piano helps me let them out." The teacher felt her throat tighten. She stepped forward slowly. "You're playing?" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It reminded me of something I forgot." Elena's expression warmed. "Music does that sometimes?" The teacher nodded. "I owe you an apology for the way I spoke to you before. I didn't see you clearly." The students turned to look at their teacher, surprised by the sincerity in her tone. Elena shook her head softly. "It's all right. Everyone gets busy." But the teacher didn't accept that. "No, I made a judgment without knowing anything about you, and I've been thinking about it a lot. You deserved better." Elena hesitated, then smiled gently. "Thank you. That means a lot." The teacher exhaled slowly, as if she had been holding her breath. Something inside her settled something that had been restless for days. The students gathered closer, forming a small circle around the piano. One of them asked, "Did you take lessons for many years?" Elena nodded. "When I was younger, yes. Music was a big part of my life. I wanted to play professionally one day. But life took me in a different direction." The room grew quiet, not with sadness, but with respect. Another student asked, "Do you still play often?" "Not as much as I used to," Elena replied. "But the love never goes away. When I sit at a piano, it feels like coming home." The teacher felt those words settle deep inside her. She suddenly realized how long it had been since she herself felt that way about playing. Years of responsibility, schedules, and training had pushed the joy to the background. "Would you?" The teacher began hesitantly, finding the words carefully. "Be willing to play at the recital? Just one piece? Only if you're comfortable." The students' eyes widened. A few tried not to show their excitement, but it was obvious. Elena froze, surprised. "Me? At the recital?" The teacher nodded. "Yes, I think it would be meaningful." Elena looked around the room, seeing the hopeful faces turn toward her. She hesitated. I don't know. I haven't performed in years." "You don't have to decide now," the teacher said warmly. "Just think about it. The offer is open." Elena nodded slowly, touched by the gesture. "Thank you. I'll think about it." The lesson continued after that, but something in the room had changed again. The students played with more emotion. The teacher gave guidance with more patience and kindness. And Elena, as she finished her tasks and prepared to leave, paused at the door. "Thank you for listening," she said softly. The teacher smiled. "Thank you for reminding us what music can be." As Elena walked out of the room, the students watched her go with admiration, not for a performer on a stage, but for a person who had shown them something real. The teacher stood still for a moment, staring at the piano. She felt humbled, renewed, and more determined to change the way she connected with her students. And deep down, she hoped Elena would say yes to the rec. The journey back to town was quiet, filled with the weight of the discovery they had just made. The chest was now safely in their hands, but it felt as though it contained more than just objects and letters. It held the essence of a long-forgotten story, a story that had been waiting to be uncovered for decades. The group walked in a slow procession, their steps almost synchronized, as if they were all aware that this moment would change everything. The town of Briar Hill seemed unchanged as they made their way back through the streets. The old buildings, the quiet homes, and the familiar faces all looked the same as they had before the mystery began. But for those who had uncovered the secret of the piano, everything felt different. The weight of the past hung in the air, and the knowledge they carried with them now felt like a thread that connected the present with a forgotten time. When they returned to the hall, they carefully set the chest down in the center of the room. The piano sat in the corner, looking as unassuming as ever, but it was no longer just an old instrument. It was part of a bigger story, and now everyone in the town would know it. As the group gathered around the chest, the historian felt a wave of emotion. She had always been drawn to the past, to the stories that people had left behind, but this was different. This wasn't just an old document or an artifact, it was a piece of the town's soul. The piano, the letters, and the photograph were all part of a deeper connection, a bond that had been lost, but now had been found again. Someone in the group spoke first. "We need to share this with the town. Everyone needs to know what we've uncovered." There was a moment of hesitation, as if everyone was thinking the same thing. This was a story that belonged to the whole town, not just the small group who had stumbled upon it. But sharing it also meant revealing something that might change how people saw their town, how they saw themselves. "Do you think they'll understand?" Someone asked. "I don't know. the historian replied. "But this is part of our history. It's something that has been hidden for too long." And with that, they made the decision. It was time to tell the story. The group spent the next few days preparing. They wanted to make sure the story was told right. The chest, the letters, and the photograph would be displayed in the town hall for everyone to see. They would invite everyone, families, elders, even the children, to come and learn about the forgotten history that had been buried under layers of time. The piano would remain in its corner, now a symbol of connection between past and present. As the evening approached, the townspeople began to gather. The hall filled with murmurs of curiosity. Some had heard whispers about what had been found, but most of them had no idea what the group was about to reveal. The historian, standing at the front of the room, looked out at the faces in the crowd. She felt a nervousness rise in her chest, but also a sense of pride. This was something important. This was the moment when the story would finally be told. She cleared her throat and began. It started with the discovery of an old piano, she said, her voice steady. An instrument that had been sitting forgotten in the town hall for years. But when we opened it, we found something much more than we expected. Inside, we found a map and a letter that spoke of something much bigger, something tied to the very heart of our town. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. The room was silent, everyone listening intently. We followed the map, and it led us to a place in the hills. There we uncovered a chest. Inside, we found letters, objects, and a photograph that told a story. The story of a family who lived here many years ago, a family whose music had brought people together, and who had hidden something important, something that belonged to everyone in this town. The historian then explained everything they had, discovered the mysterious family, the piano, and the significance of the symbol they had seen everywhere. She spoke of the photograph, the woman and the man who had been part of the family, and how they had left behind a legacy that had been passed down through generations. The townspeople listened in stunned silence. It was a story unlike any they had ever heard before, a story that connected them to a past they had no idea existed. There were whispers, nods of recognition, and a few tears in the crowd. The historian's words had opened a door to something they had never fully understood. "We don't know everything," she said as she finished her story. "But what we do know is that the piano, the music, and the family were all part of something bigger. They were trying to create a bond, something that would help people understand where they came from. And now it's our turn to carry that legacy forward." The room was still for a moment, as if everyone was absorbing what they had just heard. Then, someone in the back of the room stood up. It was an elderly man, one of the town's oldest residents. "I remember," he said, his voice shaky but filled with conviction. "I remember the piano. I remember the music." The room fell silent again as the man spoke. He told the crowd about the days when the piano had been played regularly in the town hall, how the music had brought people together. He remembered the family who had once lived here, the family who had been so kind and so full of life. He talked about the piano as if it were a part of his own memories. "I was just a boy back then," he continued, "but I remember the way it felt when the music filled the room. It was like everything was right in the world. And then, one day, they were gone. Nobody ever knew what happened to them. But I always wondered." He trailed off, his voice heavy with the weight of years. The historian stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You weren't the only one," she said softly. "None of us knew. But now we do." The man nodded slowly, tears in his eyes. I'm glad that the story is finally being told." The crowd was quiet for a moment, each person processing the story in their own way. The historian looked out at the faces in the crowd, and for the first time, she felt a deep connection to them. The mystery that had been buried for so long was no longer just a secret. It was part of their shared history. And then someone in the back raised their hand. What happens now? They asked. The historian smiled, knowing that the answer was simple. Now, she said, we carry the legacy forward. The music, the story, the bond that was created all those years ago. We honor it by remembering and by sharing it with the next generation. As the crowd began to disperse, there was a sense of peace in the air. The mystery had been solved, but it wasn't just the answers that mattered. It was the way the town had come together to uncover the truth. The piano, once forgotten, had now become a symbol of connection, of history, and of the power of music to bring people together. The historian stood in the center of the hall, looking around at the faces of the townspeople. She felt a sense of pride that she had never known before. This wasn't just her story, or the story of the group who had uncovered the mystery. It was the town's story, a story that had been waiting to be told. And with that, the forgotten grand piano, once hidden in the shadows, had finally revealed its secrets. The town of Briar Hill would never be the same again. The mystery had ended, but the legacy would live on forever.